Hi there, welcome to Urbinary, the podcast cataloging the everyday and extraordinary in the city.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Urbinary. This is Delara, and today with me there is Daniel, who is a master's student in urban planning and policy design at Politecnico di Milano, with his current focus on liminality and in-between spaces.
Hello, and thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. In today's episode, we focus on unused and abandoned buildings in the city. And we're absolutely thrilled to have Beatrice Maria Belle with us here today in Poly Radio Studio.
Beatrice is a postdoctoral research fellow at the design department of Politecnico di Milano and got her PhD in urban planning, design, and policy. Currently, she is engaged in two Horizon projects, UGP Plus and URBreath, both focusing on urban planning and the role of green and nature-based solutions in European cities. Beatrice's interests are specifically on urban regeneration processes, public policies, and institutional approach, and that's why through her PhD thesis, with the title The Role of Civic Actors in the Revitalization of Unused Public Buildings, she has provided a critical and comprehensive analysis of this phenomenon. By focusing on the emerging initiatives led by civic actors, Beatrice explores the transformative potential of these revitalization experiences in enhancing and reusing unused or abandoned publicly owned buildings. Her research topic is the main focus of this episode.
Urbinary.
Hello, Beatrice. We are so happy to have you on Urbinary here at Polyradio Studio.
Hello, Delara and Daniel. It's a pleasure for me to be here, and thank you for inviting me to this podcast and to organize this specific episode.
I would like to immediately start with this critical question. Are abandoned buildings a problem?
I think that abandoned buildings in cities are a problem. So not only because they might contribute to reiterate negative externalities, depending on the fact that they are either public or private, but also because they can be a waste of capital.
That's an interesting take, and I share your fascination for abandoned buildings, since I also came across them in my research on liminal spaces. That's why your response might come as a surprise, maybe. When looking at the attention abandoned buildings get, especially from planners or architects, who focus on seeing them more as a positive potential.
Interesting perspectives. In my opinion, what you're saying, Daniel, is the next step for planners after seeing abandoned buildings as a problem. I would say there are kind of potential problems, and that's what planners look for in the cities, right?
Yeah. We can say that it depends on, let's say, the kind of ownership. And also, if you think about the fact that they are a problem, they can also be considered as an opportunity. So the idea is that the main element is that if they are public, they are a problem in themselves. If they are private, there is, let's say, some problems related to what I said before. But actually, if they are public, it means that there is a collective waste of resources.
I believe what you said about them being kind of wasted resources is an important point, because we are talking about public, as you said here, and public capital, and that could serve in an alternative ways for public. And this is, in fact, a good starting point for our next question. Your work is mainly based on publicly owned buildings, and considering the significant number of unused buildings in different cities, especially in Italy, as it is your main focus, with an economic value and social importance, what factors do you think contribute to the failure of government administrations to address, or better to say, to manage these abandoned assets?
Oh, let's say that there are very different reasons behind the fact that some buildings are unused, some public buildings are unused. In my research, I have tried to disentangle these causes. So I have tried to, let's say, think about the fact that the rationalization of the public properties, especially in relation to the defense ministry. Then there is also a progressive withdrawal of the public responsibility and duty to the lack of public resources, because as you may know, we have a very high public debt. And so it's very difficult for public authorities to, let's say, be in charge of the renovation. Also, during the last 40 years or so, there is an overproduction of different regulation related also to different rationalities. that somehow creates some ambiguities into practices. And that's also the reason why there is a lack of private interest. Because, if you don't know how to manage and how to do intervention on buildings, then it becomes very difficult to, let's say, interact with public sector. And also there is a sort of lack of strategy and vision to enhance and include these assets into urban planning regulation. So there is still sort of sectorial area and sectorial vision of how publicly owned buildings can be risk managed.
That's quite interesting. Like listening to you, I wonder how you would assess the performance or like the how Milan deals with this. Like since it might be a unique case in Italy with its strong economic power.
So let's say that, Milano is an example. We can say also that it's an exception because, every private investor wants to be in Milano because of different reasons. And also because they are related to the market and to the branding and the kind of opportunities that Milano gives. And I think that there are lots of different examples. So, for example, in my thesis, I studied the case of Base and Fabbrica del Vapore. And in these two cases, there was, in one of them, there was like a public-private partnership, sorry. And in the Fabbrica del Vapore, there was a strong intervention of the state and of the municipality. But if you go in other cities, and if you go, for example, in other medium-sized cities or small cities, that it's not going to happen. So I think that Milano somehow is a kind of exception in this way.
Beatrice, after the economic crisis, you mentioned that the demand for unused buildings was not only from the private sector anymore, and there's been a new demand and emerging civic actors. Who are these civic actors, and why did they start to demand unused buildings?
So the economic crisis in 2008, and then the further downturn in 2014, 2016, has exacerbated this condition and situation that were already slippery. There was kind of different trends towards a different kind of organization of policies and whatever. So private investor didn't have the chance to, let's say, intervening directly on buildings because of the overproduction of laws and regulation. So they do prefer to move to other foreign real estate markets. So these public resources were really low, and it seemed a stagnant situation where the economic crisis, let's say, highlight how the traditional planning was not, and how, let's say, the traditional urban planning methods were not robust enough to cope with this situation and with these changes. And somehow there was this new trend of initiatives, mainly grassroots initiatives and temporary activities, that starts to emerge. And let's say they were like a little parenthesis on the use of these unused publicly owned buildings. So we can say that at first those activities were very temporary, and they were more or less related to bottom-up experiences. And then starting from the early 2010s, we can say that these initiatives have increased exponentially. And for me, in my research, the term civic actors takes into account both the formal organization, particularly related to the third sector organization, and the regulation that states all the different kind of, let's say, groups in 2017. And then also the informal groups of citizens, because if we are just taking into account the formal one, we are losing some parts of the phenomenon. So I think that considering civic actors as, let's say, some groups of people, groups of actors, that are somehow related to citizenships and to the role that the citizen might have into, let's say, using the space and doing something for the collective interests.
That's so interesting, since, like, for me, myself, whenever I think of maybe civic actors, it might remind me of just those social movements and those just bottom up initiatives. And what you're saying is so much more diverse, and it kind of includes a wider group of people under this term.
Yeah, and so as a response to the reduced public resources, these actors then focus on citizens' issues and use these building assets to give them a voice to be heard. So,
Yeah, so let's put this way. We can say that the public do not have any, not power, but do not have any resource, economic resource to do something for this building. So it's a waste of capital. They don't have money to invest, and so it's very difficult for them to, let's say, provide some kind of services because they are public. On the other hand, there are no market available for these buildings because it's quite complicated. Also because they are related to facilities and services, and there was this kind of neither market nor public sector is interested into investing in that, and so there was the rise of this phenomenon of civic actors that were like, okay, if not, no one is doing anything, we can do something for our neighborhood. So I think that these two elements, so from the part of the market and from the part of the public sector, somehow is the one of the potential consequence of the fact that civic actors starting to be involved into this kind of experiences. And as they are unused, they are empty, they are also as a potential, as we said at the beginning. So they are a potential, but they are potential for a specific location. And, somehow there was the side of the public that say, okay, they will give us the possibility to do something for the neighborhood, but at the same time, the public is not spending any money. So they can be some kind of agreement that are free of charge.
Yeah.
So they can give, so the public can give the building without anything, apart from the fact that in the agreement you have to say that there are some kind of activities that you need to do, but they have to be related to the public interest and the collective interest.
Yeah, and I think in this way, they kind of could offer an alternative, right, to the privatization and the commercialization, which we know that they usually prioritize those private ownership and market-based benefits to the community benefits, right, and also public access, where citizens are considered as passive recipients. But my question is how this sort of offering the alternative works here.
So the civic actors enter into the debate in a situation that it's very critical, as I said. So, they are in between the market and the public sector. So they position themselves as in between these two polarities, with a specific attention to the care and the context. So where those buildings are located, and based on the fact that citizen has some needs. So these activities are a bit different from the privatization because, when you are dealing with privatization, you just sell the building to the private investor, then you can give them some guidelines. But in the end, the private investor is more likely to do their own interests. So they are not particularly related to the collective interest. So they just can give a little share of this for the collective and for the public use. But I think that they have contributed to create a sort of social integration and places for people that in that specific moment, so let's say the early 2000 and 10, they were, let's say, neither provided by the state nor from the private sector. So they were like the in-between actor in that moment.
that sounds to me like the city should be thankful for these kind of civic actors and prefer them over market-oriented ones, since they give social value to these abandoned buildings. So maybe the question arises if there should be a stronger focus on these kind of actors to kind of solve or to rely on them for finding solutions for abandonment in the local context.
In my opinion, it might sometimes further increase this complexity because of their diversity and also, as Beatrice said, different types of their practices. some very informal, some formal, and that creates a situation where taking them into account by states could rule out their wide options of possibility. So how could a collaboration work here, and how do civic actors and local initiatives collaborate with the state actors, and to what extent are they able to sustain their autonomy while working alongside state administrations?
So that's a very good question, and I've tried to let's say answer this question when I was doing my PhD, because I was like asking myself, but how they are, let's say, relating themselves with the public, or with the market, or with the private, whatever. So I was trying to think about some background conditions that allows them to be, let's say, more, so that allows these kind of activities to be more likely to happen and to be robust within the long run. So let's say that there are different kind of conditions that can allow, and in general, I was thinking about the public attitude, which is very important, because you have also to deal with the public, because the public is also the ownership. So based on this, the public has a very specific and important role in these experiences and in these initiatives. But on the other hand, the public attitude, that can be a bit different. So can be neutral, can be completely against these kind of activities, but also can be, let's say, prone to support this kind of experiences. It's also related to the kind of co-production. So when you have co-production, it means that you are having a sort of effort from both sides. And I think that this is one of the background conditions that I've tried to highlight, because I think it's very important to have a sort of cooperation and a sort of different agreement among the different actors that are involved into this kind of revitalization processes. And I think that if you have co-production throughout the time, that will be more likely to be a successful case in the long run. Also, as you said, it leads to complexity. And complexity leads also to uncertainty. So my idea is that if I was able to find a way to highlight some kind of a background condition, so condition that has to be there if you want to have a revitalization processes of this kind, then you can lower the level of uncertainty and complexity. Not because it will be simpler, but just because you can have the chance to understand if you are in the right way or not. So the different background conditions for me were very helpful, also because they helped me in understanding the performance, the institutional performance of the different kind of a project that I have analyzed.
Yeah, it seems like a really holistic and complex approach. And in my opinion, the way that uncertainty, which is usually a topic of debate in these kind of processes, is addressed by background conditions that you mentioned is so interesting. But something that is still a bit unclear maybe for me is their success, because I also tried to explore a bit these bottom-up occupation of these abandoned buildings, and there have been many of them in different contexts. And one of the questions that always comes up for researchers and practitioners to ask here is whether they have succeeded or failed. What is your perspective on success and failure, especially when it comes to these processes? Can we measure the outcomes? Because usually economic aspects are measurable, but when we talk about cultural and social outcomes, which are super relevant in this context, it becomes difficult to measure direct improvements.
So, as I mentioned before, I focused on the background conditions, which can be considered as a starting point. So, as a sort of toolkit that you can have at the beginning when you start the revitalization process. And it's some kind of process guidelines that orient somehow you to the revitalization processes towards a successful performance, as I said. But my research was conducted during COVID. And so I didn't have the chance to, let's say, check with fieldwork how they are working in practice. So I just have some let's say, questionnaires. I just send them questionnaire. I just have some pictures of that, but I didn't understand really the environment, the kind of feelings that also other people have about these kind of experiences. So that was a sort of limitation, and I think that in this way there was the qualitative analysis that helped me in doing this. So I tried to measure the kind of performances. So when I say, for example, that a process, I know that a process is finished or a project it's not ongoing. So it means that it's closed or that it's not anything else to do. It means that something went wrong. So based on the qualitative analysis, I get the chance to understand why and how some kind of experiences went, let's say, we can say that as a failure, while other can be considered as fragile, and some other can be considered as successful. So these three main categories, let's say successful, failure, and fragile, means that there are different kind of background conditions that can be improved or lowered, let's say. But you are working on this, so it's qualitative, it's not quantitative, because I didn't have also the chance to get so many information on very specific and tricky topic.
So in these kind of projects that often are temporary projects or initiatives that are based on situated knowledge and subjective experiences, I wondered in general, like, how can you speak of success or failure? And like, depending on like what you just said, like, it really seems that this fragile condition is maybe like the most interesting and relevant one, like how to speak there of success and failure. Yeah.
So let's say that I considered these three main categories just to understand the kind of robustness the institutions are. So based on this, you can consider a successful case as, you know, a project and a process that it's ongoing, so that it's continuously evolving and that it's still in place. A failure, I have seen some of the project that can be considered a failure because they lack of some main background condition, and also they are not ongoing. So based on this, this is very simple. But as you said, there is also these failure cases that are much more related to the public attitude. So the kind of interface civic actors had with the public sector, and also the level of co-production. So these two main elements, according to also the other kind of background condition that were five. These are the main elements that can contribute to, let's say, make them fragile, because if there's nothing, let's say, if there is no kind of activities on that specific area, like let's say, to cooperate more with the public sector, or to, let's say, change a bit the idea that the public sector has in relation to those buildings, that will become a problem. So you increase the level of uncertainty, and doing this is a fragile condition for the others. So you don't know if you are going to succeed or not. So you are in between. So we can say that if there is nothing going on, that maybe they can be a failure in the long run. But if they are working on these categories, on these, let's say, activities like co-production, and to, let's say, embrace public visions, they might have a much more chance to be successful.
You propose in your research as a concluding point that defining policies is essential, which creates this curiosity for me. That is, what kind of policies, so that they don't over-regulate? Because when we talk about policies, it kind of gives me this thought of we're giving some boundaries and limitations. To what extent these policies can be flexible enough to not only limit civic actors, but also empower them and support them for their activities, especially since these policies should be really at the local scale because of the local nature of these experiences.
So the idea is that in Italy, there is a long-standing tradition about policies and regulations. So when I was doing my PhD and I was looking at all the different regulation based on, let's say, the keywords public buildings, there were a lot of them. So I think that this is a problem because we sort of creating confusion, and this overproduction doesn't help. So I think we can agree on that. So the idea is not to introduce another one, so another regulation or another tool or whatever. But my idea is that we can work on the flexibility of the process, because we are not dealing with regulation and rules, but we are dealing with process. And processes can be, let's say, flexible enough to allow certain kind of activities instead of having, a very strict regulation on what you can do and what you cannot do. So the idea is that it's not having a code, it's not having a regulation, but it's like working on background condition as a sort of, as I said before, as a sort of toolkit that you can have at the beginning, or a starting point where you can have those, let's say, glimpse of things that needs to be there in order to the civic actors, to be involved and to start, if they want, a revitalization process with the public administration. So I think that in this way, you are not allowing a kind of specific outcome, but you can just, let's say, fostering and enhancing the kind of different experiences. But on the other hand, you are giving the flexibility and the opportunity to be engaged in different ways, with different settings and with different performances.
I found it particularly interesting what you said, because in this way we can even involve and give value to those informal practices, or allow them to emerge and evolve within this framework of regulation without maybe rigid standards. This kind of flexibility, in my opinion, accommodates the diverse needs and preferences of actors, and also it will kind of increase the ability to adapt regulations based on the local need and local context, to kind of create a sense of also empowerment among civic actors. I think this approach creates some innovative forms of uses of a space, also to help civic actors in the process of reimagining them in the abandoned buildings.
Yeah, and it also assures, as you said, like a level of freedom for civic actors to get involved and take action. I think it can be a very thought-provoking take from this discussion, especially for activists or non-planning listeners. In this manner, the regulation could reflect the importance that their action have, and also encourage us planners that we should continue to open up our profession and understand our profession more as moderators and less as creators and sculptors of urban actions and situations.
Yeah, also I think that we need to understand that somehow we need to have flexibility, but also the context-driven policies, because sometimes we still do not look at practices. So we miss some parts. So we know how to work in theory, but actually we forgot how to, let's say, the things are done, and how practices are going. So I think that in this way also we can consider ad hoc arrangements that are specifically related to a specific regulation or whatever, but somehow they are site-specific. So they are for this particular situation. As an example, there is the case of Napoli. I think some of you already know about that. That there were those occupation in public-owned buildings, and there was an ad hoc situation because the public authority decided that those buildings can be, let's say, used by those groups that have occupied them, and in the end, they are considered as common goods. But this is a very, let's say, site-specific. So it didn't happen in other neighborhood or in other cities. So it just happened there in Napoli. So if you try to do the same, maybe in Milano, that will lead to a completely different outcome.
Urbinary.
To finish our talk, as a young professional in urban planning, what type of planner or researcher do you aspire to be?
In this moment, I'm working for a Two Horizon project, and in both cases, I will to work with cities. And I think that the beginning, so to be an urban planner in the contemporary cities is very challenging, especially because we have to deal with a long-standing tradition of how to plan. So as I mentioned before, and I think that what I do really want to investigate is the practice. So as I mentioned, there is the theory and the practice. So we are used to have lots of theory, but then sometimes we forgot how to practice urban planning. And I think that the practices are also highlighting those limitations and those gaps. And I think that we need to start from a different perspective. So not starting with the theory, or let's say acknowledging the theory that we have, but try to see how it works in practice. And I think that in this moment, I have the chance to see how, let's say, the literature review and all the different studies that we have done for different topics are put in place. So we have seen some kind of, let's say, fight, because sometimes as researcher we are saying something, and then when we have to face cities or we have to face the public authorities, they are saying that, but it doesn't work like this. So we need to have a step back. So we need to understand how practices are working and what we can learn from practices.
That's a really interesting take, and thank you so much for joining us today, Beatrice.
Urbinary.
And for our listeners, stay tuned for our next episode with Benshika and Natal, who will be in conversation with Gloriana Barbosa. In the upcoming episode, we will shift our focus once again and will explore the concept of smart cities. In this episode, Benshika, together with Gloriana, will highlight the narratives of smart cities as a place-based approach. Urbinary is produced in collaboration with Poliradio, the official radio channel at Politecnico di Milano.
Urbinary. The podcast cataloging the everyday and extraordinary in the city.